Welcome to another episode of Frankly Speaking with Sendra D. Please note, this episode is part one of a two-part interview. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Frankly Speaking with Sendra D. My name is Sendra Dorcé, and today I have a wonderful guest, and I love to surprise you with my topics. And I hope you will be as curious as I am about some of the topics that I've selected for this episode. I have with me retired businessman Frank Hunt. He founded Music After School, founded the concept of elementary after school activities in the state of Florida almost 20 years ago. He is also a Vietnam veteran, Air Force. Thank you for your service. Served in local and state governments in various administrative capacities. He was also the Orlando chapter leader of the John Birch Society. He started his political career as a precinct captain during the Reagan campaigns in Florida. He was asked to be the Florida state coordinator for the Orrin Hatch presidential campaign. He has taught constitutional seminars. Recently, he has served in several congressional campaigns as constitutional and policy advisor. So Mr. Hunt is gracing me with his presence. As you can tell, he's a very smart man. I love smart people. And I know my audience does too, especially when it comes on the topics of, in the realm of politics. There are a lot of people, as we know, especially in the mainstream media, they all seem to be experts until they actually open their mouth and you say, oh my goodness, really? Okay, so I won't mention which networks that most of these people appear on, but those of you who follow me, who listen to me, you know which ones they are. So I invited Mr. Hunt to come and speak to us because on the topics that I just mentioned: the Constitution, politics in Florida, the presidential campaigns. But we're going to start with, first of all, saying welcome to Mr. Hunt. Welcome, Frank, to the Frankly Speaking with Sendra D show. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So I always like to get a bit more personal as to, are you originally from Florida?
No, I was born in Kansas, but I grew up in Texas. And then towards the end of my senior year, I came into Florida. I attended Stetson University in DeLand, Florida. I have a bachelor's degree from that. Many moons ago, I won't say how many, that would date me. But then, of course, after I graduated, I was part of the Vietnam War draft. So instead of letting them draft me, I volunteered for the Air Force because I like planes. So I did that, and then we moved around, and then I was stationed for 18 months in the Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, and toured all over Southeast Asia with, I actually played 3 years in the Air Force band. I'm a professional trumpet. I have a music education degree. I played professionally with the Charleston Symphony Orchestra as a trumpet player.
Wonderful.
And once got to play with the London Symphony Orchestra.
Fantastic.
And my wife was a cello player. We met in DeLand during our college years. And she played cello, and she played in the Charleston Symphony Orchestra and London Symphony with me. It was a lot of fun.
Sounds like fun. Do you have any children?
We have 7 children, and we have 19 grandchildren.
My goodness, goodness. That's like, you got blessed by God, but with all these wonderful, unique individuals, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And so you and I talked a little bit about, the family dynamics, earlier this week, but we're gonna move straight away into what interested me and bringing you to my audience. So we, based on the introduction, and I want to say also thank you so much for your service. I know I said that earlier. I want to be clear that, those who serve in uniform have my deepest gratitude. My father was one of those, and
Yes.
from Haiti, and so I think that's what developed my passion. So I wanted you to tell me,
I might
you know,
before we do that, just on that thing, my grandfather was killed in World War One, and
sorry to hear that.
my father never knew him because he was not born. He was born after he went overseas, and
Oh
my
goodness.
father served in World War Two, and I served in Vietnam.
Oh wow. Thank you
So
so much. What a legacy. Do you have any children in the military?
no, no, they all
It stops there,
bypassed
huh?
the military. So
Well, we're thankful. I think you contributed quite a bit with the 3 generations. So, I think you can skip one. You'll be okay if none
yeah.
of your children serve. So, thank you. In my deep interest in nowadays more than ever in politics, and trying to understand the dynamics around that world, the dynamic, and one constant comes to mind, and that is the concept, the history. Where did we start when with this? People may say that this may be a topic for conspiracy theorists, but when we think about politics and the players around politics, there are two kinds. I would say there are those that we see every day getting elected, and then there are those who operate the political world, right? Those people who are actually in more behind the scenes, who are more tenured in Washington, who never lose a job, who never get to have to answer to the people. So I'm referring to what we call the deep state. And so I know it as, part of the intelligence community. So I wanted you to give me some background as to what we're currently experiencing. But take us back a bit. And when did that whole, that whole paradigm start as far as the deep state, and why you think why do you think it came about?
Well, the deep state, as people think about it right now, is only the surface. It does not touch the people behind the deep state. And they're called globalists. They're the globalists who control all the governments of this on this planet right now. They control most of the money and most of the power. Let me take you back a real quick overview, and then we can go into details later. But
Sure.
when our um, country was, the Declaration was in 1776, and in our Declaration and later in our Constitution, God ordained this land to be a land of religious freedom. And that's why America came about. And God has blessed this land as long as we keep his commandments and follow him. At the same time, though, in Europe, organization by Adam Weishaupt, who founded the Illuminati at the same time. The Illuminati, which eventually became the globalists that are behind our deep state, is really a satanic system to overthrow the freedom of all the countries in our world. And of course, when the Lord does something, Satan comes behind him and tries to mimic it and destroy it and perverts it. And so the Illuminati was the beginning of all this. Of course, there's always been conspiracies and combinations throughout history from Adam, Cain, and Abel. That was the first one, and then, where the evil tried to overtake the good. And that's always been the history of mankind. But going through the Illuminati, and then it developed, which was in 1776. Then there are other organizations that kind of came along, but they're all with the same intent, the same purpose.
Hmm.
Um, through the 1800s. And then we get to the 1900s, which is kind of the start of the present day Illuminati organization, which is called the Globalists. The
Sure.
Glo-
So help us understand when we're talking about global, which means everywhere. But
right.
tell me, there must be a center somewhere as
Well,
to where did
there's
this come from? Where did this erupt from?
Well, it evolved over generations of the Rockefeller clan, the Rothschilds, and all that money before and during World War One, where they scooped up a lot of money. But the globalists basically are all the high elite, financial elite people in this country, in this world, actually. And they're made up of kings and queens of different countries, and they're made up of financial people who, like the Rockefellers and uh,
In the
the
Rothschilds?
Rothschilds was the English ones, and Germany. They all kind of intermix in Germany and England. But right now it's centered in the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City is the American branch that handles America. And in Europe, it's called the Bilderberger Group. And
Correct.
they're handled the European, and they're called the Bilderberger Group because their first meeting was in the Bilderberg Hotel over in Germany.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. I did not know that.
yes. So all of the financial elites control all the countries through money uh, for their power and their own self, and are trying to overthrow and set up a new world order, which means that only a few would then control everything and control everybody for their own benefit, for greed
Sure.
and love of money and power. Um, and that's the globalists, and they're the ones that are behind that. The people in the deep state in our government, most of them don't realize they're part of a satanic system to overthrow the freedom of this country, as well as all the other countries. A few of them at the top do know what's going on. Most of them are just stooges and uh, people that they use who know that they've got to be part of the Council on Foreign Relations or the Bilderberg if they want to move up. They don't realize why they need to be part of it, except for their own ambition.
It's
But they
very secretive, correct? It's these societies. You and I cannot just walk into one of these
don't
meetings. They're
know.
pretty much kingmakers. So if someone who's looking to get elected, for instance, last year I saw a some footage of Stacey Abrams walking into that. This is right. I think she had lost the governorship. It must have been a couple years ago, and she actually attended because it was rumored that she was going to run for president this year.
Right.
So yeah, so she walked into that to that meeting in order to go meet with the kingmakers to see whether or not they would approve a run. So I saw Bill Clinton, I believe, has gone to these. Can you give me some names of the people that we may know that have attended some of these meetings?
Well, all of our presidents since Woodrow Wilson, except for Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, are all
Really?
part of the cabal, as they call it, and they're all members of the New World Order people. If you remember George H.W. Bush, he was a
Yes.
very big member of it. Uh, and during his presidency, he mentioned the New World Order about over 100 times at one time or another during his presidency in various speeches and stuff. Um, a little known fact between Obama and Hillary when they were fighting it out for the primary, you remember they were going neck to neck, and then all of a
Yes, I
sudden,
remember that. Beautiful day.
okay, and then all of a sudden Hillary was out of it and Obama was there. Well,
Yes.
what happened was that the two of them attended a secret meeting of the Bilderbergs right outside of Washington D.C. during the primary. And what happened was that they told the press that they were going to take them on a plane out west to meet the candidates, when actually they were meeting secretly in near Washington D.C. with the Bilderbergs. When they got on the plane and they were in the air and gone, and they couldn't do anything about it, then they told them, "Well, sorry, the candidates are not going to be there." Well, the next day, the parts of reporters found out that they attended that secret meeting, and that's where they decided who was going to be president. That's where
So
Obama chosen.
Thank you so much for that. So, I want to interrupt a little bit because you're giving us a lot of information. Some of it I already know, some of them I don't. I have the superficial information about because I haven't dug deep. There are people who are fascinated by this. My life does not allow me to dig so deep into it. I grew up in Washington, as most of the audience probably knows. I grew up in Montgomery County because my father was stationed in Washington. But again, we touch on the point that a lot of people say that these ideas are stem from conspiracy theories. So people are going to ask you, how did you get your facts? How did you come to know all of this? Before we continue into the history of the deep state, tell me, how did you come to acquire this information?
Okay, let me mention one thing and then make sure I get back to what you just asked me. But
Okay.
um, anything that the mainstream media smears, you automatically know it's probably true. And they make a big deal out of conspiracy, smearing it like it's a bad word. All conspiracy means is that it is two or three people who in secretly are planning something that is evil. That's the definition of a conspiracy. Well, before the internet came out, we had the three major networks, and they were part of the conspiracy, and they kept everything secret from the American public.
Interesting.
Now with the internet, now it's not conspiracy anymore because they're actually out in the open about it, because the internet has brought some light upon what's going on. So now, give me
Amazing.
the question again that you asked me a minute ago. Your
So I
question,
wanted to say those three networks that you're referring to, is that CBS, ABC, and NBC.
right?
So yes. So I want you to continue about the history until we get to today. But I
Oh,
wanted
okay.
to give a little
Yeah.
bit of background as to how you come to accumulate this information. So your facts are based on your research, correct?
Well, it's not my research. No, it, I learned a lot of this through the John Birch Society, which was founded in 1958 by a man named Robert Welch, who was a brilliant genius. He graduated from college, went into college at 16 and graduated within a couple of years from college. Was a genius, but he was doing some research in the Library of Congress, and he came across a little blurb about John Birch, who was killed in communist China in 1949, but it
Hmm.
was covered up. And so he delved into it, said, why is this covered up? And so the more he dug into it, he found out that in right after the war was over, Chiang Kai-shek was the nationalist president of China, and he was fighting now Mao Zedong and the communists who are trying to take over um, China. During the war, they fought together against the Japanese, but once the Japanese were conquered, they were fighting each other for control of China. Our state government, because of the deep state people in there and the globalists who controlled it, they wanted Mao Zedong, they wanted to go to communism, okay, because they could control communism, and communism they can use for their own purposes. But so they took all the weapons away from Chiang Kai-shek and gave him to Mao Zedong so that he was able to conquer. And of course, the nationalist Chinese had to go to Taiwan, escape Mao Zedong. But in 1949, John Birch, who was part of the war effort in China, because he was a Baptist missionary who served in China before the war, he helped bring in a lot of bombers into China. He was on the ground spotting where they needed to bomb. He also was instrumental in helping Doolittle and his crew get to safety after they did the raid on Tokyo.
Hmm.
But so he was murdered by Mao Zedong's forces because the Mao Zedong's forces knew the influence that he had from all the years he was there, and so, but his death was covered up because it was a direct result of the subversion of China by our own State Department, which has happened throughout history. Um, so as he started doing it, he gradually uncovered the deep state and then the globalists behind it. And he uncovered all this research. And of the people who are trying to undermine and overthrow our government. So he formed the John Birch Society, and his task was to set up chapters all over America. And the goal is to educate people on this, because once people know what's really going on, then they will make the right decisions. But right now, most people, particularly through those other three networks, are not getting any information. And we
No, they're
don't,
not.
even on Fox News, which is gone
Oh,
liberal.
Fox is definitely a sad story. It's I've grieved and buried them already.
And
So,
then,
but one of the things I want to touch on what you're sharing with me with John Birch, because in preparation for this talk, of course, I did a bit of research, and we know that the basis for this it's an advocacy group, and their main focus is to educate people about communism. And so in essence they are anti-communism, and they're also about limited government, which is really a basis for libertarians.
yeah,
My background is, in two prior elections I voted libertarian, and I'm very proud of that. This year I voted for Donald Trump. But before that I was a freedom seeker, and I just want limited government, and I don't want anything to that smells like communism or Marxism, but we'll get to that. But what I did find also is the what you were referring to as the smear jobs that they do when you're trying to get the truth out. There are writings on the internet about the John Birch Society that it's a far right neo-Nazi group. So I want you to talk about that. Of course, I knew that was going to put a smile on your face, and I actually, because my neural pathways are a little different than the average person that goes searching on the internet.
right,
I question everything.
right,
So they can't hold me hostage. And
right.
so, but when I did see that, I said, "Oh my goodness!" Now I'm more interested in them than ever before. It did the opposite for me. I said, "Well, that's my kind of group. If they can get that level of attention,
Well,
and
they not only they were so effective in the late 50s and early 60s, they were so effective in fighting communism that even Pravda, who was the propaganda arm of the Soviet Union, went after them, as well as the three major networks, because
absolutely."
they were uncovering and exposing what was going on. So I hope you got past Wikipedia in your
Oh
research.
God, I love Wikipedia. It actually got me through business school. And those of you who went to business school with me who are watching, if you remember, the lecturers would always say, "Where did you get that information?" I said, "Well, Wikipedia." And he would say, "I wish you'd do more research." I said, I will do research after I get my MBA. But for now, Wikipedia is my source. But Wikipedia is also part of the deep state, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say, don't go to Wikipedia, because
Right.
anybody can put their information in there and change it, and that's why you
Absolutely.
see uh, when they that's why if they don't have an argument, they start calling you names. And Nazis is actually a socialist party, so for a freedom group to be called a Nazi is exactly opposite of what it is. The ones who are calling it usually are more close to Nazism and socialism than the freedom patriots are.
Yes, indeed. And it's sad because what we're experiencing now in the US is these smear jobs on steroids.
Yeah,
And it's interesting because I'm very outspoken about my appreciation for President Trump because of his the what he represents, not the man. I worship no man because I only worship God. But what
yeah,
he represents more freedom than any other president has ever demonstrated. The transparency that he brings to the conversation is unprecedented. So of
no,
course they will say, but he lies so much. I said, because you think that you've already set him up as being a liar. So you're going to always think that whatever he's saying is a lie. I don't see it that way. I question everything, but he's proven to me that he is capable of, how can I say, executing on his promises. So that said, let's move away from, because this is not a conversation about Donald Trump, but this
right.
actually is, Donald Trump is the one that piqued my interest about the deep state. So he is definitely he warrants some attention during this conversation. So we've been talking about the John Birch Society, and as they were one of the first to expose this phenomenon of the deep state. So I want you to continue on that topic, please, and help educate myself included in all those who are watching about what's at stake here, the deep state. So we know they are global, and it's a layer of society that a lot of people don't even know. We don't see them on television. They don't give interviews, but they are the ones who are in essence making decisions for most countries. And being in Haiti, poor little Haiti,
Yeah.
they've seen the wrath of the globalists, because Haiti was independent for a very long time until the globalists said, we've had enough of you, and so we're gonna take that from you, and now we're gonna take control of you, and you shall never see freedom again. You had that freedom once in 1804, but mind you, that was a privilege we provided you, and now we are taking your privileges away. It's like a parent who sends a child to detention or to time out. But anyway,
Right.
that said, so we know how they can be. They've gone around. I mean, with all the wars have the fingerprints of these globalists, wouldn't you say?
Well, they're the ones that brought the wars on. They use war as a way to destroy a society and to rebuild it in their image, not in the image of that country. And so they brought on World War One, and their intention was to create the New World Order then, and that's why they tried to do the League of Nations. That was their first attempt. But our Congress was not was aware of what was going on, and um, canceled the League of Nations and did not want to be a part of it. So that basically destroyed the League
What year was that?
of 1918, right after the war.
So
Uh,
that would mean that the Plan B came about as the UN.
you're right. So then they set up and brought on World War II by doing the Versailles Treaty, which they made it so that the um, Germans would eventually have to fight back because they were basically stripping Germany of all of its wealth and everything through the treaty. So that and now um, George Bush's George
Which one?
H.W. Bush's
Okay.
father, his father helped fund um, Hitler for World War II.
So wait, so W's grandfather?
Yes, was
Okay.
one of the businessmen, part of the elite that helped fund. He wasn't the only one, but he helped fund Hitler and the rise of Hitler because he was part of the globalists, and they wanted to bring on the war, and so which they did. That's why George H.W. Bush was part of the deep state or the globalists,
You can't
because
get any deeper than the CIA.
the globalist is the bottom rung, or I should say, really, it's the top rung,
Right.
because and then they control the puppets of the deep state, which are all the bureaucrats and the
The
second
civil
level,
servants.
yeah, the second level people, the intelligence services, all of that, the banks, etc.
The
So
ones that we see being questioned by Congress and the Senate, on a loop. But they never
yeah,
nothing happens to them, but they just parade themselves. It's like, the Gong Show. They keep, parading these people, and nothing happens to them.
yeah. So you should ask a reporter when they start talking about the intelligence people are saying this and that, say which ones, the globalists or the freedom ones? you know, which intelligence officers are you talking about? So
It's interesting. Uh, Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, that's all right. Go ahead. You had a comment. I want to go back.
Yeah, I
So
want you to go back to, yes, to the point. I think we need to clarify a bit more about this this nest of what would you call it, uh
globalists,
globalist. Yeah, I
yeah,
was trying to find another term because the global it's ugh. So
that's
the
but
hornet's nest, that's the word I
after
was trying to
World
find. That
War One,
hornet's nest, it's like a cluster of evil And of course, people are going to question me, and they say, well, I question you because you say you question everything. So go ahead and question.
Right.
I'm just fascinated by this topic, and having been around it, because I did say my father worked for a government, and he probably, I wish I had my father here so I could ask him those questions, but unfortunately I don't. So I'll have to you know, rely on Frank to educate me. So
Right.
please carry on with what we were talking about.
Now,
So,
we need to back up a
World War
little
II, we're at World War II now.
bit. Okay, we're going to back up a little bit before World War One because 1913 is when the 16th and 17th Amendments came in. The 16th Amendment gave us the income tax,
Okay.
uh, the graduated income tax. Graduated means that it's not the same for everybody. And that's one of the planks, one of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, the graduated progressive income tax. They brought that in. It was really actually never ratified totally like it's supposed to be. But just like they're doing with the election right now, the globalists went ahead and said, okay, we can't ratify it, but we're just going to say it's ratified and move on. Of course, we didn't have the internet. People didn't know what was going on. So they would just moved on and said, we've got it. However, right after that, it was challenged by the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court basically said it wasn't a new tax, so which meant it wasn't really an income tax on people's labor. And there's a whole principle behind that we can talk about later when we get to the Constitution.
Sure.
But this is part of the coup of the globalists to take over our country. So they have the income tax because tax is used, uh, 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 and the illegal tax as the income tax is used to control people. You use it to control people, not to pay for the expenses of the government. Um, there's a lot behind that statement, but anyway. And then the 17th Amendment is where they took the states lost all the states' rights because the 17th Amendment changed the election of senators from being appointed by state legislatures to being elected popularly by the people of the state, just like the House of Representatives.
I see. So what would that be? What's significant about that point? The fact
Well,
that it's the state legislature that would appoint a senator, just like, I'll take an example. Well, in Georgia, it was different because Governor Camp appointed Kelly Loeffler, and because I think someone retired, but
right.
he's a governor. But in this case, in the past, you're saying that it would be the state legislature that would appoint someone.
Yes, they would appoint the two senators, and that's part of the checks and balances because our Constitution is a system of checks and balances. And the check was that if the federal government wanted to pass some law, used to have what they call unfunded mandates, where the federal government would come out with some program and tell the state, you have to do this program, but we're not going to fund it. You have to fund it. You see, and so then they stick the state with a bill, even if the state didn't want the program, and that's called an unfunded mandate. Well,
My
the
goodness.
checks and balances comes as if the state legislature is controlling the senators instead of the people. The state legislature will tell the senators veto that bill. You see, and that was a check of the states on the power of the federal government. For the globalists to control our federal government and control everybody under it, they had to get rid of the control of the states over the federal government.
How did they manage to do that? How is such a significant change? What's the process for something like that to happen? It
Well,
goes
I,
through
this
it
is
goes
in
through Congress, and then it goes to.
this is in 1913. You don't have the internet. Most people don't know anything that's going on. They're getting ready for a war, so people are not thinking about it. And they always come out. The other side always come out with these nice phrases like, "Don't you want all the senators and all the House representatives to be voted by the people instead of a state legislature? Isn't that dumb?" And people don't understand the Constitution, so they don't understand the significance of the change. And so they hoodwink them and rush it through. And they can very, very well do it. Back then, it was very easy because you didn't have the internet, you didn't have people knowing what was going on, and they did it.
Of course, it's easy back then, but it's easy now. We're being gaslighted right now. That's a term that I use almost every day for the last week and a half. This gaslighting that is taking place, you question what you're thinking, what you're seeing, what you're processing. So even though back then they had no internet, they managed to get it through. But now we do have supposedly transparency, but they still manage to get things through. There's no difference. It's the agenda. It's more important. They'll adjust to the times, right?
Well,
So
what
it's
I'm
just
saying
like,
is, like, they could, with their money and power, they control most of our people in Congress. So when they really want something, they come down hard if you don't toe the line. So they control 99% of what goes on anyway. So anything they really want, they can get now because they have so much control and power. And back then, they still had all the money, most of the money.
so it's interesting because
So
they have money and power.
the coup. That was the coup that took over our government, which led into World War I, led into World War II, and the United Nations. You know, now the United Nations was started by Alger Hiss, was the first Secretary General. He was actually a communist, and he wrote the Charter of the United Nations. So the United Nations is kind of the culmination of all this for the last 200 years that's been going on, because you can look at the difference between our Constitution and the United Nations Charter. Our Bill of Rights our Bill of Rights does not give us any rights. Did you know that?
No,
It
I
does
did not.
it does not give us any rights. All it says is that the government cannot take away our God-given rights. It says the government um, shall not prevent, et cetera, et cetera. So if you read the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, it is
This
saying
is
the
the
government
book. I
is
suggest everybody get one.
right. The government is prohibited from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because those are God-given rights. Now, the UN Charter Bill of Rights, all the rights are given to everybody by the UN. It comes from the UN,
The
not
UN. So, you know, it's interesting because the UN was founded back in the 40s, or was it? It's about
right
70 something. The
after World
30s or the 40s?
no, in the 40s, right after World War II. It
Right,
was
in
the
the 40s.
invitation.
It's interesting because Haiti was one of the founding members. I'm proud to say. Once in a while I'll get something that I'm saying I'm proud of that. You know, um,
Well, so were we.
knowing how independent Haiti was. I'm curious to know whoever was sitting there, because they were so um how can so focused on maintaining their freedom and their independence to come to cooperate with such a system. I find that odd, knowing
Well,
what Haiti represented.
of course, the way they sold the UN to people at that time is that this was going to stop all wars forever. Don't you want to stop all wars forever?
So that was the pitch.
That was the pitch. And of course, that's not the goal of it because the wars haven't stopped. Uh, but it was started by the communists. And in fact, one of the things of the UN is that the secretary that's in charge of military for the UN, it's in the rules that it has to be a Russian, a Soviet Union representative. It cannot be anybody else in charge of the UN armies. So anyway, there's many things about it, but
We could go on and on, but we're going to stay focused on the first part that we talked about. So
okay,
we've gravitated to the Constitution a little bit, but I want to take you back as far as, we're now in the early 1900s. The deep state started in 1776. We're now in early 1900 after World War II. So tell us from that from that in that timeline, what was the evolution? How large was this group in comparison to what it is today? Then,
it, back in the early 1900s, it was still our government was greatly infiltrated by the communists throughout our government in the early 1900s, all the way through until now. Actually, you remember the Joseph McCarthy era, which the media smears him because he was trying to point out that there were many communists in our government. Well, he was actually right. Of course, the media and everybody attacked him because the deep state, of course, attacked him and the globalists because they didn't want to be exposed and destroyed him. You know, he wasn't strong enough to withstand that onslaught. But they are thoroughly. Those are the people who are in our State Department who gave the guns and told Chiang Kai-shek, if you do anything, we're going to bomb you. We're taking your guns, giving them Mao Zedong. You know, it permeates all of our government, even to this day.
So in the media for sure.
Oh well, actually, back in the early 1900s, the not the Rothschilds, but Rockefeller and a couple of the others decided. They said, what are the most powerful news organizations in the country? And they said, if you have these 25 news outlets, you control the news in this country. So they bought up all 25 of those, and so that the deep state now controlled all the news in our country. And the New York Times is their flagship. That is their main one, and everybody takes their cue.
That's very clear. They're not trying to hide that. I think they've been exposed by Donald Trump. You know, when he's from New York. The interesting thing is to watch Fox News gravitate to that. I mean, I'm not one to listen to the press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany. I mean, of course, you know, I'd rather get my alternative news and see what the analysis goes from there. But to hear that Fox News shut her down and says, well, we don't know the facts. Neil Cavuto, we don't know the facts, so we're going to turn that off until we can discern it for you, because you're not intelligent enough to discern for yourself. And then, well, if we decide that this is good information, we will let you know. Okay, well, so I don't curse on this program, but this is the time where you say this.
For your information, Fox News has always been controlled by the deep state, by the globalists.
Even when Roger Ailes was there?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Because the owner was Rupert Murdoch, who is part of
Globalist. But his sons are running it now, Lachlan Murdoch.
Which are more liberal, and now they're showing their true colors. But you notice, though, they would give just part of the information to the conservatives to keep them there, but they would never talk about the conspiracy or the globalists. Mm-hmm. You'll notice, never. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but Rush Limbaugh is part of that. He's not a globalist, but he will not talk about the conspiracy as well as some others, because if they do, they know they'll be taken off the air. So,
but also let's keep in mind that, you know, there are a lot of people who are loyal to Israel, and Mossad definitely, you know, plays a part in all of that. I mean, that's one of the most intelligent agencies. And so when I think about, you know, people like Rush who have lasted such a long time, there's no way you tell me that, you know, they haven't flirted with those agencies, because those people have their tentacles in everything and around everyone. Just stay away from me. I'm just a curious person.
Yeah.
By nature, who likes information, and I'm trying to give it to the people. So you know what? I come in peace, no harm to be done here. So Frank, let's talk a little bit more about the size of this, you know, how it's grown from the 1776 to early 1900s. And so let's see how they expedited the growth of this organization, how they, you know, extended their reach throughout the world.
Yeah, I mean, they extended their reach. I was going to say real quick, when you want to take over a country, there's two things you have to do. One is you have to control information, and two, take away their guns. And then you can take over a nation. That's why they haven't been able to take over America. They control the news, and pretty much, but they can't take away the guns. And so that's helping us. We're the last nut to crack, which is pretty close to it.
They're trying to abolish the local police.
Right.
So they can have a militia police. That happened in Haiti. I gave a speech at a Back the Blue rally on to support the police. And I said, you know, people think that I have seen it because my father was very high ranking, and I got the privilege to see how deep state operates because my father was a good soldier, military general. So, I say to people, I didn't have those concerns, because I was in that bubble. But once you come outside the bubble, you're like, oh my goodness, that's what that was. I mean, that was. When my father brought that ballot home and only had one name on it, supposedly during an election, that's clearly, government control. So I say this because, I'm not trying to divulge my father's secrets, but he never spoke about anything. I had to figure it out for myself. But one of the things that I saw is, I talk in the speech how, that I gave an example as, when my father was serving as ambassador in Venezuela. The helper at the house came to what was terminated. His job was terminated by my mother, and he went to report my family as having guns in the house. So as a result, the what do you call it, the protection services came barging into the house. My father was serving the country abroad. My mother was in the house, and the man who the house helper reported we had guns. Of course we had guns. My father was served military for like what, 30 plus years. He's gonna have gun, and this is 80. It's not like you give your guns away when you retire. So they took my sister and my sister and my mother to the police station, and my father had to make calls. But the point of the story is, and I tell the story to alert people, just because it's Haiti, it can happen here. That was just a prototype. They started with places like Haiti to do a test run for what they can do on a larger scale in this country. They will take the guns.
Right.
They will take away the military service. They abolished the military in Haiti. And so, you all know the story. But it just means that we need to be more vigilant now than ever, to wake up and to recognize that we are not immune to these strategies. They
Right.
have been plotting as to how they can implement them for a long time. What took a year to do in Haiti will, probably took 100 years in the US, but it's still gonna happen if we don't be
They've
careful,
already
if we're not careful.
they've already run the test run of taking away our guns. You knew that, right?
No, I
It,
don't. I didn't.
okay. Remember Hurricane Katrina? What
Yes.
happened there? Okay. They went through the well-to-do neighborhoods, and they were going into people's homes and taking their guns and arresting them for having their guns in their homes, because they were saying, we want to make sure there's no rioting. Well, people have the guns in their home to protect themselves,
Right.
but there are pictures of them with residents in handcuffs on the street because they had guns in their home, and they weren't allowed to with their emergency decrees. And so now they became criminals during the Hurricane Katrina.
Insane.
Yes.
So, Frank, so was this because George W was in office at the time? And of course they called him all sorts of names because they thought he abandoned the people, but that's another conversation. Um, so was this at the state level or the federal level that this order was passed?
It would have been federal level.
So
The
this is on
National
this is
Guard,
on George W.'s watch. Then he's the one that
yeah,
made the call.
federal and state. I mean, the National Guard um, is another whole story in itself, because it's been perverted from what the Constitution never called for National Guard the way they're using it now, to be federalized. The National Guard was actually the state militia that the Second Amendment gives us, but it was to be controlled by the state, not the federal government. So even though the
So
government
much.
control it, the president now has the power to nationalize it and send them off to Iraq to fight. So,
So much to unpack here. So much to unpack.
yeah,
So
each of these
where
statements would be about 5 hour lecture.
oh, we'll talk about 5 years probably. We could start a whole university program with this information, and you do lecture, at the university level. So I want to get you stay on track to understanding the evolution of this movement called the deep state. And so I'm here speaking with Mr. Frank Hunt, who is a constitutional expert, the Constitution of the United States of America, and we are talking about the intelligence community, the globalist community, the deep state community, and how it's now evolved to the point where they may actually realize their 2020 agenda. So we're not at 2020 yet. We're still discussing now where we've arrived at the mid 1900s. So take us to mid 1900s and what happened there with this movement.
Well, in addition to what was going on in our country with all the deep state and the communists that are in our government and the globalists and their people, they use foreign aid, which is not authorized by the Constitution. Foreign aid is unconstitutional, but they use foreign aid to prop up communist countries around the world. And this is how the globalists used our tax money to further their agenda to keep all these communist countries from going under. Because as we know, if a communist country is left on its own, it doesn't last a long time. The socialism gradually eats the goose that's laying the golden egg. It's what happens. And so they use foreign aid to put all these despots in power around the world. You have Omar Gaddafi, and you have Saddam Hussein, and all these were all put in by the United States.
Hugo Chavez,
yeah,
in Panama. What was it? What was the Panama? Goodness.
Ortega.
Or Noriega, who was a good friend of Mr. Bush.
Yes.
While he was a CIA. But I want to
So-
talk about the tools that they use. We'll talk about the globalist, how can I say, platforms, so the World Bank. We'll talk about the IMF. All those are tools. You know, they have these blank checks and they just write. And this is like, as far as I'm concerned, economic blackmail, because
Right.
they know these countries will never be able to repay them. So it's a form of hostage taking. This Stockholm syndrome. You are indebted to your captors. You know, you can never leave.
Yeah, they're all part of the New World Order. Is the International Criminal Court, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, the WHO, the WTO, World Trade Organization, World Health Organization. They're all UN agencies, and they're all part of the whole New World Order. I'm sorry, my Texas drawl kind of gets in the way with saying world, but anyway, so and all of our wars since Korea have all not been wars; they've been UN actions sanctioned by the UN, and that's which is unconstitutional also. That's why we haven't had any really declared wars by which the Constitution mandates. They just have police actions. Amanda, when George H.W. Bush went into Iraq the first time, he was waiting for the UN to authorize it, not our Congress. So they've used all these to put these despots in power, and then they use our foreign aid money to keep them in power and keep the Russian and the communist countries going. Except, I mean, it's a vast network around the world, and the TPP, all these trade agreements, are all part of it. The European Union was the first attempt to bring the European under their thumb. The NAFTA was the North American Free Trade Agreement, which to bring North America under their thumb, which finally got canceled by Trump. However, USMCA, the
Right.
United States Mexico Canada Agreement, is actually going to be worse than NAFTA now, because it still gives.
You mean for the American worker?
Well, it's bad because it gives our sovereignty over to international organizations.
Let's hold off on that a minute, and so let's keep moving along. So the IMF and the world, all these globalist tools. It's interesting because Christine Lagarde, who's French, and she was a minister in France, and she was prosecuted for crimes that the French people think that she should have spent time in jail for, and then she became the head of the IMF. the person, and now she is the head of the central bank, I believe, in the European Union. So this is all decided. It's not decided by us. But it's my money because of course you got to wonder who's paying for the IMF, but it's not coming from them. It's coming from us. And so
Yeah.
this woman who seems to have a spectacular career and never is held accountable. This is what happens when you hear people say, well, they made a deal they made a pact with the devil. So what do the we're talking about how these groups take countries hostage. So
Mhm.
the deep state, and that includes these international organizations. We're talking about IMF. We're talking about the financial organizations. The Feds as well. Is the Feds part of that as well?
Oh, yeah. Well, yes, definitely. The Federal Reserve is actually not part of the government.
No,
It's
it's a private
actually
organization.
it's a it's the international bankers who are controlling our money, and it was unconstitutionally created. And that was part of the takeover in the early 1900s. Because, as they say, I don't care who makes the laws as long as I control the money, and that's what they did. And the Federal Reserve, a national bank like that, is part of the Communist Manifesto also. So it's so anyway, and that was a
You know,
takeover our financial situation.
you're
And now
trying
let
to.
me
What's
how they
interesting is
brought the
that Donald Trump went through a Twitter war with one of the Rothschilds when he was threatening to shut down the Federal Reserve. Do you remember that?
oh yeah,
One of the
well that's
Rothschilds got really upset, and one of the younger Rothschilds, and he was calling Donald Trump. And it's interesting how they got so triggered by that. You got to say, why are you so concerned? So that's what
that's
popped
how
up
they
in my
control
mind
the
when we
country.
talked
They
about.
control the country through that. Now it was passed illegally. It should have been a constitutional amendment to change that because the Constitution gave Congress the power to regulate our money, and then change it from Congress to a private entity needed a constitutional amendment to change the Constitution. But what they did was they did it on a Christmas Eve, right at the very end of a congressional session, just before they're going to break for Christmas, and rammed it through. Charles Lindbergh's father and some others fought against it. They knew, some of them knew what was going on, but most did not. And most of them weren't even there to vote against it. And so they rushed it in. And of course, it was just like the 16th Amendment, that wasn't really ratified. They pushed it through, and nobody at that time, people didn't understand what it was. They didn't
Mhm.
understand that the constitutional illegality of bringing it about. So they just did it and it went on. And so, yes, Rothschilds would be very upset if they got to the Federal Reserve.
One of my favorite people, Dr. Ron Paul. He is definitely not on the Rothschilds Christmas list either. So
Yeah,
he's
he's called
very outspoken.
yeah, his nickname in Congress is Doctor No because he votes against everything that's unconstitutional, which is about
Indeed.
98% of the laws.
Can you
Yeah,
imagine had he been president of the United States? I mean,
yeah,
that's like a dream that you never want to wake up from,
yeah,
because he's the one that inspired me to become a libertarian more than because I had had enough with the Bush administration. I said, I'm so finished here, so I'm just gonna start voting third party. But anyway, we want to go back to to the economic wars that these large globalist organizations have been imposing on, because somebody thinks it's physical wars, but the economic war is even worse because Haiti
yeah,
has never known war with the United States, but in essence it is held hostage. So some of these other countries, for instance, you take out Omar Gaddafi, you take out Saddam Hussein, if you take out Chavez, the economic war, because Venezuela is one of those countries that is one of the richest in resources. It has the largest oil reserves, but yet it cannot sustain itself. So this economic war is what really destroys a country more so than a physical war. So that's been incorporated in the globalist agenda. So if you can't bomb them, you're going to, take the money away from them, make sure they cannot feed themselves so they can come back begging. Would you say that's
Right.
inaccurate?
Yeah, that's fairly accurate. It it's more than that though, because it's not only economic, but it's part of socialism that leads to communism. And but the globalists want communism because it's easy, because the communists can control their little few people at the top, control the whole country. So if they control just those few people of all these countries, that's easier than them trying to control all these countries. So they want communism and socialism and Marxism in the countries because it takes away personal freedom. And the few people at the top to get all the money will keep everybody in line for them. All our foreign aid, most of it never got to the people anyway. It goes to the pockets of the dictators. So we're kidding ourselves thinking that it's really helping the people because it doesn't get to them.
Sure. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Frankly Speaking with Sendra D. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Frankly Speaking with Sendra D on Sendor TV. Please subscribe to the channel so that you can be notified when a new episode is uploaded. Also follow us on Instagram and on Facebook, and we definitely appreciate you being part of this community. Pray for humanity.